and welcome to Lux Occult, a podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin language, and also discuss a variety of occult topics. I'm Luxa, and with me today is special guest Dave from Unearthing Paranormalcy podcast. So, welcome to the show, dude. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm super stoked to hear about Druidry and Druidism and all of it. But before that, could you tell us a little bit about your show?
Absolutely. Unearthing Paranormalcy is available on all podcasting apps. My wife, Amy, and our brothers, Chad and Eli, dig into hauntings, cryptids, enigmas, spiritualism, the occult, and really anything else that falls into the can't be proven or disproven by science category. We've recorded over 100 episodes. Most of them are good. We had to undergo a bit of a learning curve. But we also dig into mythology, spiritual paths, and philosophy. We try to present our topics in a way where we explore from all angles.
Yeah, it's a really fun and cool show. I definitely can tell that you do a lot of research into the stuff that you guys cover, which is really cool. And I really like the vibe of it. It definitely feels like hanging out with family and talking about spooky stuff when you listen to it. So, and with all the, I don't know, isolation with, everything that people have been dealing with, I think something simple like that can definitely be very welcome. You guys should definitely check it out. I'll have a link to their website and everything in the show description. So yeah. Okay, so what would your Druidism in a nutshell definition be for some of our listeners who maybe haven't heard of it or maybe are somewhat unfamiliar with the term?
If I can go back a little bit into history, now don't worry, I'll keep it light and hopefully entertaining.
I think it would be good to have some context, yeah.
So very little was written down about the ancient Druids, and the only thing we know for absolute certainty is that they themselves didn't write anything down. But we know from what people wrote about them is that they were religious leaders of the Celtic peoples. Their roles were varied and included working as teachers, scientists, diplomats, judges, and philosophers. Now, back in the early 18th century in the British Isles, most people were stuck with the duality of belief in a dogmatic religious perspective of the world called Christianity, or a dogmatic, scientific, materialistic perspective of the world. This might sound familiar to some.
That does sound a little bit familiar now that you mention it.
Well, there was a small group of mostly misfits who wanted a third option. An option where nature wasn't made evil and to be avoided and rejected, as was the case with religion, and where nature wasn't something to be conquered, as was the case with the scientific community. When it couldn't be found, they just said, you know what? We'll just make our own third door. And thus brought us the Druid Revival, where men and women developed a natural spirituality free from orthodoxy and dogma, remembering that we are a part of nature and not outside of it. Gone were the days of the Renaissance when mages like Paracelsus, Heinrich Agrippa, and Giordano Bruno proclaimed the reality of magic to the world, and when occultism was a major cultural force. Now, when it comes to Paracelsus, I like his full name of Philippus Aurealis Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. It's so fun to say.
I think I need to try that. Okay. Philippus Aurelius Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim.
Very good. But this scientific revolution all but banished that occult vision of a cosmos woven together by subtle power and replaced it with Newton's universe of dead matter spinning in an infinite void. The age of reason, some call it. So then a little over 200 years later,
fast forward,
I grew up in the suburbs of Oklahoma, aka the Bible Belt, in the 80s and 90s. A time where anything that wasn't Christianity was viewed as just a form of disguised Satanism. Some popular movies from the time were Jaws, Anaconda, and The Edge. Real man-conquering nature type stuff. I also watched quite a bit of American mythology, Paul Bunyan and John Henry, the steel-driving man, which all ended with the heroes dying or being defeated by modern-day technological advancement. I watched the siege and the burning of the compound at Waco, and I vividly remember the horror of the Oklahoma City bombing. Like those misfits back in the 1700s, none of this orthodoxy, dogma, or extremism appealed to me. Now, I did dabble with Christianity briefly when I was about 10 and 11, but I never felt a connection with it. It's a valid path for many. My father found enlightenment through it. Early in his life, he was an occultist, and he applied the methods of meditation and insight from that with the Bible.
That's really interesting.
It's a fascinating collection of books. I've read most of it. Keep in mind, there's about 50 versions with different books added or omitted, but my takeaway from watching my father go through this is that too many religious people take the Bible literally or don't even read it at all. It's kind of the equivalent of reading Native American fables and thinking all the animals in them really did those things, and that there can't be any lessons to be learned on the conscious level of human existence. Occultists know better. Now there is, in fact, several Christian druids, and out of the many I have met, they are predominantly non-fundamentalist.
Okay, that's cool. So, I mean, Druidry doesn't preclude other belief systems, right?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I know Muslim druids. I know druids that are into Satanism, because there's really no orthodoxy or dogma with it. It really fits with any path.
Cool, very cool.
But I was the kind of kid that spent most of my time outside. I tried to be creative in public school and use the knowledge I was gaining from it, but failed miserably. And mostly because I just wasn't very good at parroting knowledge.
Yeah, maybe better not to get started on education. I have a lot of thoughts on this topic. It's a big topic of conversation at my household. So.
But I've also felt a connection to nature and had what's called animistic beliefs. It's something most children have until they're criticized or bullied out of it. The people I grew up around were adamant that a connection to nature was something that didn't exist. It was something not to be talked about and something to be ignored. Even when I grew older, I noticed this was the norm. It makes a lot of people incredibly uneasy when you discuss human beings being natural beings, especially against the puritanical backdrop of American culture when it comes to topics like sex. And then, another example of that uneasiness would be how most guys respond to a woman talking about menstruation or childbirth.
I just fainted a little bit.
Oh, clutch my pearls. TMI. Too natural. I mean, it's getting better, but that could just be because I tend to surround myself with people that are more open-minded.
Yeah, no, me too, definitely. And what you're talking about in terms of this like idea about nature being scary and everything, like it's almost like just the fear of the unknown itself, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that could play a big part into it. I mean, you do have several movies where it's like apocalypse or, oh no, the volcano is going to destroy the town. And then it's, instead of man versus nature, it's nature versus man. But
Yeah, definitely. All right, I'm sorry, continue on.
so when it comes to Druidism, we see that it really isn't an ism at all when compared with ideologies like Catholicism, communism, extremism, or even atheism, because Druidry is free from orthodoxy and dogma. However, if we look at a word like heroism, the ism isn't meant to portray worship, belief, or worldview. Instead, it is encompassing the aspects of the hero. The word Druidism to me is much the same. It's not the worship of the earth or of the ancient ones or even the teachings of the philosophers of it. It's about drawing inspiration from the legacy and spirit of those that worked as teachers, scientists, judges, and philosophers in the ancient Celtic parts of the world, i.e. the Druids, which doesn't require a deep historical understanding of them, thank goodness. As a chaos magic practitioner, I don't need to tell you it's very problematic to believe that a tradition has to have an ancient or historical pedigree to be valid.
Those are fighting words in some places, but they are welcome here.
So Druidry to me is mostly about three things. That I am not outside, above, or below nature. I am within it. That when presented with a duality or a binary, making it into a ternary leads to better understanding by transcending the conflict the opposing forces have on their surface. And that it's okay to be a misfit and think for myself.
Absolutely, I agree.
But because Druidry is unorthodox, everyone defines it for themselves. And with that, my definitions will change as my knowledge increases. Now, Druidry is also what I consider the art and practice of being a Druid, like carpentry, pottery, chemistry, masonry, and so on are the arts and practices. The Druid path remains for the most part what it was at the beginning of the Druid Revival, a daily life lived in harmony with nature, seasonal rituals that celebrate the cycles of nature, and meditation to unveil the secrets of our own personal nature. For me personally, it has become a religion and philosophy that has incorporated in itself an emphasis on knowledge and science, married with magic and spirituality.
Okay, yeah, very cool. Okay, so what steps were most fundamental for you when it came to crafting your own independent spiritual path?
That's a great question. Learning about Druidry is one thing, but becoming a Druid by practicing Druidry is another. Druids choose for themselves amongst many options for a personal nature spirituality. Organizations like the Ancient Order of Druids in America, which has provided a great influence to my Druid path, advises a threefold approach to the beginning of one's path. Threes are a common theme in Druid and Celtic philosophy: 3 rays of light, 3 circles of manifestation, 3 elements of nature, the triads which govern the laws, customs, and wisdoms of the ancient Celts. Just like all those are based upon threes, this approach can be explained best along 3 paths: the sun path, the moon path, and the earth path.
Okay, cool. All right, so what's the sun path?
The sun path responds to the need of participating in the cycles of nature and spirit. Traditionally, this is celebrating the cycle of Druid holy days, the solstices, and the equinoxes. Some, including myself, have adopted what's called the cross-quarter days into this calendar. If you've ever studied paganism, particularly Wicca, this is the same 8-fold calendar used in that system, which was developed by the Druids Gerald Gardner, the founder of Wicca, and Ross Nichols, the founder of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. These days are celebrated with rituals which can be found all over the place. Most orders and individuals have their specific rites with emphasis on different aspects of the meaning behind them.
Okay, cool. So the sun path is kind of about like keeping these holy days and like following the calendar.
Yeah, exactly, and following the seasons and everything else like that.
Very cool.
Now, the moon path responds to the need of self-knowledge and developing the potential of the self. This is accomplished mostly through meditation. The AODA, which again is the influence of most of my practices, recommends discursive meditation daily. Starting on the path, I had to work pretty hard to get into this practice effectively. Another practice is the daily sphere of protection ritual, which I use. But any other ritual designed to protect, balance, and purify the life force can be substituted. Some druids, particularly ones into ceremonial magic, just use the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. Later on in the moon path, this is where ritual magic plays a big part. But other practices which lead to the discovery of the self is included. Even therapy would be a valid for the moon path, with a good therapist, of course.
Okay, cool. Interesting. So the moon path you could consider like if you were maybe a chaos magician who was into druidry, you could consider ego magic being part of the moon path probably, right?
Oh, absolutely. That
Okay.
would fit right into it.
Okay. Cool. Very cool.
And while the sun and the moon path offer a balanced system of natural spirituality, spirit must express itself in the material world or it accomplishes nothing. In other words, a spirituality based on respect and harmony with nature and the living earth. The earth path is the path toward that harmony. On the first steps of this path, it requires stillness, focus, and study. Stillness is a rather simple exercise, which is extremely hard to do when you're used to the distractions of the modern world. But it simply involves going outside and being in contact with nature. And this doesn't have to be some far-off wilderness setting. An abandoned parking lot with some weeds growing in it would work just fine. And all you do is you stop, you look, you listen, and you feel. You try to empty your mind of thoughts and distractions and just be receptive of the nature around you. Now, focus isn't that complex either. It isn't visualizing, like sacred geometry patterns and holding them in your mind for several minutes. It's just making detailed observations of a specific thing in the nature setting of your choosing. So this could be a plant, a puddle, an anthill, or a 1 foot square patch of grass. And if you start doing these things, these two practices, it won't take long, especially if you frequent the same areas, for the wildlife to notice you and be intrigued by you. They see you as human, obviously, but you're not acting like all the other humans do.
I like that. Like, do you ever learn anything from the animals that come to visit you when you're doing this practice?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've learned quite a bit from them,
Very
from
cool.
studying them and observing them. And
Very cool.
which, I mean, like somebody like a hunter or somebody who spends a lot of time outdoors being still, I mean, they already know this stuff. They're in their behind their blind or up in their tree stand, and then the birds are coming and landing on their shoulders and stuff, and the squirrels are coming up and chittering at them.
Yeah, no, definitely. I do think hunters get this probably better than most people, for sure.
Now, the next part of this is study, and that involves reading books about the natural history of the area in which you're living, learning about flora, fauna, natural ecosystems, weather patterns, and because humans are natural beings, one can't neglect study of communities. Still concerning the earth path, the druid begins taking steps towards living in harmony with nature, and this can be accomplished by learning one thing, preserving one thing, and letting go of one thing. Now, every druid chooses these for themselves. There's no rules to what you must pick, but I'll give some examples of each.
Okay.
So through stillness, focus, and study, quite a bit is being learned. But learning a skill is what this is mostly about, especially a skill where your inner critic says, you wouldn't be good at that, you're not talented, you don't have the time, and so on. But I have a secret for becoming good at any skill. You just have to be really bad at the skill for a long time. And if you have any doubts about that, come listen to the first 10 or so episodes of my podcast. Or look through all the macaroni art my mother saved from my childhood. And I might even have some of all that terrible fantasy fiction writing I did in middle school.
Dave is dropping some esoteric truths here, everyone, so get out your notebooks.
Oh yeah, that's a big druidic truth right there.
I like it. Yes, I think we've said something kind of similar on the show before about like the first step to being okay at something is sucking at it really bad. But
Exactly. You just gotta stick with it.
very cool.
And then preserving one thing begins with a desire to learn to do something the way our ancestors used to do it, by hand or with non-powered tools, especially something that has been phased out or is being phased out. I'm sure we can all think of several off the top of our heads, but also keep in mind this includes learning older technologies that newer technologies have taken over. Things like learning land navigation with a compass and map instead of a GPS.
Yes, everybody should learn that, by the way. Just saying. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a very important skill to have.
And it's not that hard.
Or like learning to use a slide rule instead of a calculator. If you don't know how to do cursive writing, you could learn cursive writing. Some even learn languages which are dying out as they're being replaced with English, like Gaelic, Welsh, or even Latin. It doesn't necessarily need to be Celtic.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, I mean, this is like perfect for somebody who's like kind of a hipster and is like, oh, I'm gonna like preserve this old 1980s, boombox technology and have my whole
Oh,
collection of it. I love it.
yeah, exactly. Or like learning to brew beer or something, or
Yes.
how to blacksmith.
Yes. Indeed.
Now, the third one, which is usually the one that's the hardest to even start on, letting go of one thing. One thing that takes the burden industrial society has placed upon the living earth. Now, this can be something as simple as replacing poisonous pesticides and fertilizers with natural alternatives, buying things locally grown and produced, choosing to fast meat 1 or 2 days of the week, all the way to things more extreme like replacing your car with a bike, going vegetarian, or living off the electrical grid. There's a lot to consider in our modern society when it comes to consumerism. The first thing that comes to my mind is how far did the product have to travel, and on how many trucks, trains, and planes to get to the market I'm going to buy it from. How much waste is involved with it, as far as packaging and processing goes, and how long is the product going to last, and after it's no longer useful, or it inevitably breaks, can it be upcycled, recycled, or is it going into a landfill or directly into the ocean?
Mm.
I could go on and on with considerations for buying this over that. Minimalism isn't the goal here. I mean, that's an extreme, the opposite in duality of consumerism.
Sorry, if I could just interject real quick too, and I think that what you're saying is really important. This is something I think about all the time. And considering to buy something, I think another thing that's important to consider is your motivations. Are you motivated by an actual need, or are you motivated by some other, perhaps emotional reason that might not actually be true? It might be the artifact of your being perhaps manipulated by very smart people in the marketing sector of our society. I don't know, just saying.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. Those advertising magicians that send us all that stuff that we need to go buy.
Those annoying evil magicians.
But with this letting go of one thing, the ideal is to pick one thing you can do honestly for an entire year. Now, my first year, I found it kind of hard to find something because I was already doing most of the things with ecology and conservation in mind. But what I set out to do was learn more about using natural methods for basic healthcare needs, since the American healthcare system is very pollutant and unethical towards nature. In later years, I got into organic gardening. There's also a local program my wife and I have been involved in where parents in the community sell kids' clothes back and forth with each other instead of just buying them new. Because as parents know, their little kids grow so fast that their clothes are mostly like new when their ankles are out the bottom of them and their bellies are hanging out of the top. And as a homeowner, I have the freedom to choose more energy efficient appliances as the older ones break, and the freedom to make my home more energy efficient by sealing windows, adding insulation. I've installed a thermostat with timers on it and stuff.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, just kind of being aware of that and mindful, I think, is just really important, you know? So, yeah, hell yeah. All right. How do you feel about taking a little bit of a break, a bibliomancy break?
Oh, that sounds fun.
All right. Are you ready to ask the Oracle a question?
I am ready.
All right.
And I would like to know which illusion is blinding me.
All right. Excellent question. Go ahead and flip a coin.
I got heads.
Okie doke. And roll a d12, please.
I got 7.
All right. You have selected Chaos Making a New Science by James Gleek. A text very near and dear to my heart. All right. Paris, what illusion is blinding Dave? All right. If a drop starts off its life already moving downward, then it will break off sooner. If it happens to be on the rebound, it will be able to fill with a bit more water before it snaps. Shaw's model was exactly crude enough to be summed up in 3 differential equations. The minimum necessary for chaos, as Pontclair and Lorenz had shown, but would it generate as much complexity as a real faucet? And would the complexity be of the same kind? So there you are.
Wow.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I need to meditate on a little bit of it, but yeah, definitely.
Okay, I'll take a picture and send it to you if you want. I
I
think I can
appreciate
find
that.
it again. No problem. Or a transcript of this recording, one or the other.
Yeah, that's extremely insightful. Hail Eris.
All hail Discordia. She never lets me down, except for when she wants to, and that's her choice. um, Before we get back to the regular portion of the show, do you have any general thoughts about divination or anything like that?
For me, divination is the second leg of the cauldron of druid magic. I practice it every day, and I also cast 3 divinations for any magical working I am considering. It's very fluid, and I find the symbols of divination are as greatly faceted as the images found in my dreams.
Yes, very cool. I agree. Okay, so how does your practice play out in your daily life? Or like what does it kind of maybe look like in quotations for you?
Hmm. Because Druidry makes up a great deal of my philosophy, as most individually focused spiritual paths do, it's always in the foreground of my thoughts and definitions of my experiences. I'm sure we all at one time or another have stopped and thought to ourselves something like, man, this day has been the 9 of Cups, or some equivalent to it.
Fucking 9 of Swords all the time. No. Constant nightmare. Does 2020 towers and 9s of Swords, no, left and right.
Oh no.
So sorry.
So as a kind of just a second nature from doing it for so long, I challenge dualities and binaries I notice and look for the ternary of them. As far as my daily practices, I spend anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour a day conducting rituals, divinations, and meditations. Then maybe a few hours a week with other spiritual, ritual, or magical workings, and then a few more hours studying. I mean, that might sound like a lot or little depending on who you are, but currently I feel like it's a great balance between my family, my career, and my hobbies.
Yeah, hell yeah. I mean, balance is super important. That's
Hmm.
very cool. Definitely good to keep in mind. All right. So when we spoke in the past, you had mentioned that you enjoy creating a variety of different things.
Hmm.
Could you kind of go into the specifics of how your like magical or spiritual practice relates to your like creative endeavors? I would kind of like to hear maybe an example of how things like might play out in like a specific like art or craft project or working or whatever like you want to call these things. I don't know.
Magic combines well with the Druid path, and for many, including myself, other arts such as poetry, crafts, music, divination, healing, sacred geometry, the study of ancient traditions and of sacred landscape. These have all been a long part of this tradition. You know, creativity is magic, and magic is creativity.
Definitely.
Alwyn is the divine inspiration that flows. It is the source of creativity. Alwyn is often symbolized by the 3 rays of light. Opening yourself to Alwyn is fairly easy. Most people have more creative inspiration than they know what to do with, but blocking yourself from it is just as easy. Studies have shown that the same parts of our brain that house our creativity also house our inner critic. So when we say things like, I'm not creative, I don't have time, or I can't do that, those words, like all words, have magical power.
Oh, that's so interesting too, and that kind of explains a little bit why things like automatic writing and stuff are so effective.
Absolutely. I've found that whenever I'm writing, if I'm typing along and I go, "Oh, I don't like that sentence. Back up, rewrite." Then I'm done writing. Cuz at that point I'm in the critiquing mode. I'm into editing and
Yeah.
it's done. It's
So-
gone. The flow's gone.
and I think that I'm sure that kind of applies to other things other than just writing, like whatever you're creating or maybe even just focusing on. I'm not sure. Interesting.
Mhm.
Huh.
Yeah. So much like dams that hold water, all one builds up behind it and explodes out. Or worse, the river behind that dam dries out. But all one wants to flow, and it wants to flow through everyone into creative expression. When it bursts out of the dam, it goes all over the place. This is why people will have bursts of creativity, even if that creativity is only being used by that inner critic to come up with new and creative criticisms that keep you from your creative expression.
Oh man.
Or another example of that is like you'll see these musicians that'll put out like 3 or 4 albums in like a year, and then you don't hear from them for like a decade.
Yeah. No, that is really interesting. I think it's kind of the same thing of like when you're trying to like suppress something, no matter what the reason is, it will sort of like explode out in sometimes strange ways. So
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But Alwyn is not something you can force or ignore. It's something to be worked with and responded to. One technique I use to cultivate Alwyn on the material plane is just a basic ritual using the 3 elements of the Druid Revival.
okay, cool. So what are these three elements?
The Welsh bard Iolo Morganwg, one of those misfits from the beginning of the Druid Revival, wrote about 3 elements to nature, which can also be considered principles. Altogether, they make up the principles of all existences. There's Kalas, which is Welsh for hard. This is the source of form, stability, limits, and the principle of matter. Now, earth is a pretty good hermetic element comparison.
Mhm.
Guyar literally means blood, but as a general meaning, it's fluidity. It's the source of change, motion, growth, decay, and the principle of flow. Water's a pretty good hermetic element comparison. The third one is Nuivra, which means sky or heaven. As an element, it's the source of life, consciousness, and the principle of the life force. It's the energy that places people and things hold. For a comparison, Kung Fu calls this Qi, Yoga calls it Prana, and Eliphas Levi called it astral light. Modern industrial societies have no word for it because this is the exact thing we are conditioned in America and some other Western societies to ignore from a very young age. And mostly because it can't be studied scientifically like how Kalas and Guyar can. Nu Ifra is the energy people radiate. It's also the feeling and awareness of that energy, which in turn affects others around you and them. This is why an angry, bitter person can affect the mood of an entire room, or a happy, outgoing person can do the same. It's the reason people are inspired by the motivator, and it's the uneasiness we get when there's a baby crying nearby. Sixth sense, gut feeling, intuition, hunches, the vibes are just a few examples of what occultists or others that don't ignore this energy have called it. All when the divine inspiration that flows and the source of creativity is a concept of Nuivra.
Okay, very cool. I suspect that maybe Peter J. Carroll might call this Kia. Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I believe he does.
All right, so how do all these things kind of like fit together?
If you look at your hand, all three elements are there. The callus is in the bones and the skin, and it's also the joints that limit us from bending our fingers to like touch the back of our hand. Guyar is the blood that flows through it, and it's the movement and flow the hand is capable of. Nu Ivra is the life, the vitality, and the sensation of the hand. The presence of this life force makes it active and sensitive. Land, sea, and sky is another triad associated with these on a basic level, but land, sea, and sky also incorporate the other two elements within them, just in smaller amounts. Everything contains these three elements to a degree. Like a stone has high kalas, moderate nuivra, and very slight guyar. Because stones do flow, they just flow very slowly. The wind is very high in flow or guyar, and its callus or matter is molecular in the form of oxygen, nitrogen, and other gas particles. The nuivra can be found in what the Renaissance occultist Paracelsus called the sylph, or the air elemental. So like imagine you're at your table in front of like your dinner. The callus is the raw material, the meats, the grains, the fruit, the vegetables. Guyar is the cooking process that turns those raw materials into the meal. And Nuivra would be the selection of the ingredients, the recipe you chose, and the skill and personality of the cook.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I like that way of contextualizing it past just like the characteristics of like the matter of the things. Very cool.
Yeah, because it's also the principles and everything.
Sure.
If you want to try a simple exercise to feel Nuivra, if you never felt it before, if you're unsure you have, start shaking your hands for about a minute. And then, while they're relaxed, rub them together for another minute. Then hold them out in front of you, palms inward, like you're holding a ball about the size of a cantaloupe. Concentrate on your palms, and then just move them back and forth a few inches, slowly and slightly.
Very cool. It sounded for a second like you were gonna say one of those tricks that we all heard when we were kids.
Like where you put your arms in the doorway and then step away.
Yeah. Can you touch your elbows behind your back? All right, so yeah, that's cool. Definitely try that.
One metaphor I like about balancing out the three elements for a magical purpose is by John Michael Greer. It begins with the harmony with nature, then adds two other themes, symbolism and intentionality, to make it a triad. Intentionality can also be thought of as will, which some, and I'm guilty of it myself starting out, mistake for willpower.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to point out because willpower and will, with the capital W, they are different. They have some relation to each other, but like true will isn't really like about forcing things, I suspect. I mean, Asher and I talked about that back in the first episode, so check that out if anybody missed it. But yeah, like what you're saying, it definitely is a little bit more nuanced.
Mm-hmm. There's also the term true will, which comes from Thelema. In the first lines of the Book of the Law, it is written, "Every man and every woman is a star." Now, I took this to mean that everyone has a trajectory, an orbit, and that problems only arise for us if we move out of our orbit or if somebody interferes with ours. And another aspect of that is stars can't change their true will because they can't change their trajectory. I personally view Crowley's concept of true will as just my nature.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that perspective. That's really interesting.
Now, Eliphas Levi wrote, "The great work is, before all things, the creation of man by himself, that is to say, the full and entire conquest of his faculties and his future. It is especially the perfect emancipation of his will." So I learned early on that if I approach with the intent to conquer with willpower, it's not harmony with nature, and it's exhausting. It ignores the momentum of flow and natural patterns. It's like, as JMG puts it, crossing a lake on a rowboat without paying attention to the winds and currents. You can put all the effort you want into rowing, aka willpower, and make very little headway, or worse, end up further from your goal and exhausted. But one extreme cannot be substituted for another. You can't throw those oars down and just hope, pray, and wish the winds and currents will take you to your goal. So with this binary, finding the threefold relationship between the two opposing methods provides us knowledge and transcends the conflict. JMG continues, "If we learn to read the winds and currents, we can work with them and row ourselves into a current towards our goal."
Yeah, no, just to interject real quick, like this idea of kind of transcending duality, I think is really important. I think we're kind of a lot of times trained into this kind of yes or no, this or that kind of perspective, and it's not always conducive to a growth mindset. So what you're
Mhm.
saying about finding that third way, I think, is very good, very
Oh
helpful.
yeah, it's embedded into us from when we're small children. When we
Mm.
read the fairy tales and or we watch the Disney movies, and there's the good guy and there's the bad guy.
Yeah, and this way of thinking often leads to completely erroneous under misunderstandings of things, I guess. Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. Now, if you all listening haven't found your true will, or know your nature, or have begun the path Eliphas Levi called the Great Work, I would recommend taking those first steps by meditating, or at least contemplating on the question, what does the acorn know of becoming the oak tree? So during this cultivation of awe and ritual, it's very informal. No grove opening ceremony, no circles, no calling of elements, no additional tools. I just grab the tools I'm going to use for my creative endeavor, be it pencils, paintbrushes, needle and thread, crocheting needles, saws, chisels, a writing keyboard, or even a musical instrument, and I mean, so on and so forth. I hold these tools, I feel their matter, and I feel their energy. I give them thanks and honor. What I'm trying to accomplish is establishing a connection with them. And then I chant 3 times, Kalas, Kalas, Kalas. I begin to visualize what I am wanting to accomplish. I incorporate the knowledge of the past and present of my capabilities. Then I imagine myself going through the process of creating what I want to create. Then I chant Guyar, Guyar, Guyar. After this, I give thanks and honor to the living earth, my ancestors, inspiration, energies, and my own capability. Then I chant Nuivra, Nuivra, Nuivra. And then I follow this with chanting Aowen. And then I began creating.
Yeah, fuck yeah, dude. Well put. I think we should leave it there. I mean, Dave,
Okay.
thank you so much for being on the show. I look forward to hearing more about Druidy divination with the OM staves and a very interesting system of correspondence that you've been using, which links the Pagan Wheel of the Year with the OM and a few other things. So this is going to be coming up soon, everybody, in the second installment of this collaboration.
Thank you, Lux. It's been great learning so much from you this past year. I'm loving your new shows. I'm happy I had the opportunity to share, and I look forward to sharing more things I've learned and experienced on this druid path.
Oh, well, I appreciate learning all this stuff from you too. This has been really interesting and really insightful and enriching. So I really do appreciate it. Is there anything other than the Unearthing Paranormalcy podcast that you would like to plug?
I never knew anything like Druidry existed until I was almost 30 and I just stumbled across it. From the stories of others I have met on this path, Druidry just kind of found them also. For more information, you can check out aoda.org, druidry.org, or tribeoftheoak.com.
Hell yeah. And I will have those sites listed with links in the description if anybody wants to check them out. All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for listening to Lux Occult podcast. If anybody has any questions, thoughts, or arcane revelations that you would like to share, please do not be shy. I would love to hear from you for sure. Write me. um, Check out the new Instagram account for the show at Lux Occult Pod. I put some like fun pictures of like breakfast magic and other like random shit about trying to like live magically and all that. We're going to have Dave take us out with a few last words here.
We don't convert, but if anything I spoke of resonated with you, I would like to share with you the words of Dame the Bard. There are others just like you, who feel the power of earth, sea, and sky, of dragon and fairy and shades of the night. Hear the call of our ancestors of blood and bone, of womb and tomb and standing stone. Lady, stir your cauldron well, chant your words and sing your spell. Deep within this darkened hall, hear the goddess Caradwin call. Come and taste of the cauldron's brew, and magic she will give to you. You will dance in the eye of the storm, your Caradwin's children, the cauldron born.